Welcome back, everybody. It's Dr. A, Associate Professor of Economics at Northern Kentucky University. Today's episode is brought to you by the Econ Games. This is a discussion from February where we had Trey Johnson from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland talk about the program on economic inclusion. Trey, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure for me to be here speaking with everyone today. Um, my name is Trey Johnson. I work at the Cleveland Fed on a recently launched initiative called the Program on Economic Inclusion. And I will spend a little bit of time presenting on kind of myself, how I came to work in an economics field. So if you've ever, excuse me, heard anybody at any Federal Reserve Bank present before, you will hear them use some similar disclaimer to the one I'm using right here, which is that any views expressed today are those of myself and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland or the Federal Reserve System or the Board of Governors. Um, so yeah, now that we got that out of the way, um, who am I? Who is Trey Johnson? I am a native Clevelander. I have lived in Cleveland for the majority of my life. I spent 2 years at U of L doing a master's degree in sport administration. After that, I spent a little bit of time in Western Pennsylvania in Erie, PA, after I finished my grad school, but have lived the majority of my life in Cleveland, have always known that I wanted to work in Cleveland and do something that was going to help out my community. What specifically that meant, I wasn't really sure, and I still don't even know what I want to be when I grow up. But I mean, I think it's important being from Cleveland is a part of who I am, as is the fact that the two most important roles in my life as a husband and father have been married for almost 14 years, and I have a son who will be 10 in a matter of weeks. Incredibly important parts of my life. I think they're probably the most important roles I have, but those roles keep me really busy. Unfortunately, being from Cleveland, that third one, being a sports fan, means that I've experienced a lot of torture and anguish. I do feel for any of our Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky Bengals fans today. I was actually rooting, as a Browns fan, I was rooting for Cincinnati, but sports are also a big part of my life, having played sports my entire life, having a master's degree in sports administration, have been a high school athletic director. Sports are a big part of my life. Um, the next thing, introverted people person. So we were kind of joking before we got started, and I was like, man, I'm so nervous. I was like, I'm a people person, but I'm really introverted. So most people don't believe me, but I love talking to people, but I will be completely exhausted when this is over. I'll probably need to lay down on the couch for like a half hour and just peace and quiet. And then lastly, I'm the program manager for economic inclusion. I will explain what that means in a second, but how did I get here? Um, I mentioned I wanted to work in Cleveland, and I think my North Star has always been just a desire to help people. I think that's been the most important thing in my life, and every decision that I've made professionally and also personally has been around wanting to help others. And so usually when I look at career choices and there are job opportunities that I'm looking for, the first thing people ask, like, oh, what are you looking for? And I'm like, I just want to help people. And I think I want to make a difference, and wanting to make a difference in the community really opens up a lot of opportunities to me. I've also had to trust my gut. There have been some times when I've had some interesting career changes. And sometimes, I've questioned like, oh man, am I making the right decision? And thankfully I've been able to trust my gut, and I have a very supportive and understanding wife who also lets me pursue these opportunities. To give you like from a chronologic standpoint, I know there's a little bit of information on my bio, but I put the winding road there because I think my path to the Fed has actually been really unorthodox. So I spent a couple of years working in high school. I worked as a high school admissions counselor. I decided that wasn't a career that I wanted to pursue forever. So I went back to school, got a master's degree in sports administration. About 2/3 of the way through my program, I realized I didn't want to sell minor league hockey tickets. And I wanted to do something that had meaning. And so I ended up afterwards working in a community center, doing grant writing and running after school programs and running sports programs. And then landed a job working in another high school where I was in charge of transportation logistics for the school. And then I was athletic director for 5 years. A really odd combination. I also took on student activities. Did that for 5 years. It was the most rewarding job I've ever had in my life. But during that time, my son was born, and he was born, without getting too far, he was born 13 weeks early, spent 98 days in the hospital in the NICU. He's perfectly fine now. You would never know the difference, but it changed my perspective on work and like work-life balance. And so I said, hey, I need a job where I'm not working 4 nights a week and every weekend. So fast forward there, I applied and was accepted into a fellowship in local philanthropy, which really changed the trajectory of all of the work I would do. People were like, how'd you go from a high school athletic director to working in philanthropy? I still don't know. They saw something in me. I am forever in debt to them. After that 2-year fellowship, of which my wife thought I was crazy, she was like, what do you do after 2 years? And I was like, I'll be the 10th one. They have to figure out some plan. I was fortunate. I landed in another foundation where I did work on entrepreneurship education. And then after spending 3 years in the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, I was fortunate enough to join the Cleveland Fed and work in community development for 3 years, where I spent before I joined the program on economic inclusion. So that is my bio. I know it's extremely unorthodox. I think it has provided me with some interesting experiences and insights, and hopefully you'll see why as I talk about this. So more specifically, I'll talk now a little bit about the program on economic inclusion. So as I mentioned earlier, PEI was launched in November 2020 by the Fed. So this was happening, kind of in the midst of George Floyd and kind of the racial unrest that was happening in the country. And I think the bank wanted to be a little more intentional about the work that we were doing related to racial equity and economic inclusion. There were similar efforts happening around the country at other Federal Reserve banks. And so for the first few months, though, PEI was kind of a shared endeavor. So there was no ownership of one group, then there was no dedicated staff. But myself and my teammates, Denise Alaprentis and Hal Martin, joined the team in July of 2021. Since then, we've really tried to help the program take a little bit more shape and kind of figure out a direction for it. But I think what's important is that what we're doing is we're seeking to understand the factors that can lead to economic opportunity for all. And specifically, we want to understand what are the challenges and the barriers that cause specific communities, whether they are along racial lines or gender lines or geographic lines, from being unable to experience that economic opportunity. To give myself a little bit of a break, I'm going to try to play a video here that I think does a really good job of explaining what we seek to do through PEI. So it's about 4 minutes, I think this will be.
A canvas can't reach its full beauty without every piece in place. Each texture builds off of another, and each brushstroke has its space. Our economy's like a canvas, one that isn't fully clear, because we exclude vital pieces from its image every year. The Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland studies our economy. They found it can't reach full potential without racial equity. They track systemic proof that these disparities affect us all, and their program on economic inclusion shows where it's gone. Gender and race disparities hurt the economy we live in. Estimates of the labor gap could cost the economy trillions. People born in predominantly minority locations have lower access to wealth, and that ripples through generations. Education, secure jobs, high-quality housing, and credit. These disparities still stand from a racism that's systemic. It could be traced from employment to small businesses and wealth, and still exist today in ways that still damage our country's health. The more access to good work, the more our economy is stable. People can't participate if they're prevented or unable. Unless we have equal chances, change will only reach a handful, and these inequities will rear their heads in new ways. For example, The pandemic reduced employment in every ethnic group, but Black and Hispanic workers have harder journeys to recoup. What can we do when research shows that people struggle to advance? Our canvas won't reach full potential if we don't have equal chance to high-quality education and to labor opportunities, to economic inclusion in all our country's communities so we can combat poverty and work at high potential and build wealth, change our trajectory, strive toward new life credentials, close the pay gap, set up generational wealth for new families, intervene so our economy can thrive where it is lacking, take these broken and torn pieces and assemble something greater where we'd stand on equal ground, not racially divided craters, where a new image will form out of these disjointed statistics. It is possible, it's reachable, it's more than optimistic. Part of the Federal Reserve's mission is to maximize employment, and economic inclusion helps build this goal and deploy it. Their economists and analysts provide public with research from our region and our nation where these facts are found and featured. Our divided systems can assemble if we get involved. A greater understanding helps us face these issues till they're solved. Our economy can grow greater. For too long, it has been severed. Change can come, but only if we all put these pieces together.
So hopefully you guys were able to hear that, and I think we're going to share this presentation afterwards, and I would invite you to go back and watch it again. I think the video was pretty powerful, and for a number of reasons. One, I think the poet who put that together, worked with some Cleveland Fed staff members to make sure what he was saying was accurate, and he referenced a lot of our work, but at the same time, what I find most appealing about that is that it puts it in the plain language what we do. And sometimes I think from my experience, primarily from when I was in community development, a lot of what I would do is that I would go out to the community and have to try to translate what the work that our economists and our researchers were doing. And I felt like that video so beautifully put that in just like plain terms that people could understand. And so we don't write poetry at PEI, but I think that, hopefully you can read between the lines and figure out what it is that we are doing there. So next, I guess I'll talk a little bit about what PEI works, what our work looks like. So the first part of where our work I would touch on is probably some of the things you would expect from the Fed and from, an arm of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. So we do research, we do literature reviews, we do commentaries. So we are, talking about issues that are related to economic inclusion and that do have an impact on it. And some of this is kind of like the basic blocking and tackling from the Cleveland Fed. And a lot of the work that I would say that we do is not just on the PEI team. So there is work that is done through our community development team. There's work that's done through our broader research department. And our economists who work in both places are contributing to work that's happening there. One of the big things that we are doing though as a PEI staff though is that we are trying to start facilitating conversations and interactions between researchers and practitioners. That was a big thing that we've thought about, and I think that is going to be really important to the impact that we're able to make. And then we have some more traditional just community outreach activities. I'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail. And I think the rationale behind trying to get people to interact, particularly researchers and practitioners, was really meant to get people out of the silos that they work in. One of the things that I found through my work in community development was that we would a lot of times researchers were doing good work that would have an impact on the community, but community members just weren't aware of it, or if they were aware of it, they didn't understand how to interpret the data or how to interpret the findings or what to do with it, how to actually put it into practice. And similarly, when we would bring together researchers and practitioners, we would find that also the researchers weren't aware of of what the community needs were, of what they were hoping to do with the work. And so, as we started having these conversations, we decided, hey, there's a real spot here where the PEI and the Cleveland Fed can make an impact, and that's on bringing those groups together so that each one of them is a little bit more informed about what the other group is doing, and how to kind of tailor the work to be supportive of what's happening on each side. So, in one way that we're doing that is we have recently launched a series called the Conversations on Economic Inclusion. And the first conversation is live now. So if you go to the PEI webpage, you can see this. The first, and the way the conversations are structured is that we are having 3 individual conversations with researchers and practitioners, and then at the end of those 3 conversations, we'll bring everybody together for a roundtable discussion. The first series that we've started in was actually just filmed over the course of the past 3 weeks, has focused on the state of racial inequity in the country right now. And so we have speakers, or 3 speakers for that set of series, where Ruby Mendenhall, Dan O'Flaherty, and so Richard Rothstein was the last one. And so we had the way that we had these structured was that, DNEC, who was on our team, had individual conversations with each of the 3 speakers. And then when we brought them together, have a big group conversation. And we will continue to have that over the course of the next few months. We will be talking about issues that we think have an impact on economic inclusion. I put on the bottom there the podcast on economic inclusion. I think one of the things that we hopefully we'll get to the point is that we want to start a podcast where we talk about issues related to economic inclusion. But I think these are some examples of how we're trying to facilitate those interactions. The next one, excuse me, getting a little bit more about the research and the lit reviews and commentaries. We just want to talk about the areas of interest from some of our PEI research staff. And I think it's important to figure this out, because as you think about how we can be most effective, I think it's important to know what issues we're thinking about and what issues our researchers and our team members are thinking about. So we do a lot of work on specifically racial inequality, but we're looking at how that shows up through neighborhood effects and the impact that has on education. We think a lot about excuse me, housing, whether that be rental subsidies, of housing, taxes. We think about neighborhoods and sorting. We think about labor market outcomes. The last 2 are actually relatively new topics that are things that we're going to be covering, and I put them on here because they're actually areas of studies for 2 new research economists that we just hired, who will be joining us this year. But one of those economists is doing work on racial representation in municipal government, and the other economist is doing work on education and policing, and on the intersection and the impacts that those have. So just wanted to point that out. I think those are important. These are all important topics, and are probably most often things that people, when they see this, if they're not really working closely with, or if they haven't been as familiar with the Cleveland Fed and PEI, they're always like, oh, I didn't know the Cleveland Fed cared about education and policing. And so I would say it's really refreshing to have conversations with people and to be able to change the thoughts about what we're working on. So lastly, I will talk a little bit about my community outreach, and this is kind of the space that I'm in, the space that I spend most of my time as a non-economist. And really the goal here is to just, 1, to be a resource for the communities within our district, and then 2, to be an expert on the situations and the experiences that people are facing. One of the things that we really want to do over the next couple of years is to understand what are the challenges faced by each of the communities that we serve. So if you're not familiar, the Cleveland Fed has a footprint that includes the entire state of Ohio. We have Western Pennsylvania, we have Eastern, maybe 1/3 of Kentucky, and then we have the top 6 counties in West Virginia. So we have a pretty broad footprint, but we know that there's a lot of variety and a lot of diversity within that broad geography. And so what we want to do is we want to spend some time getting to know what are the challenges faced by people in those communities, recognizing that there will be some similarities that we're not expecting, but there are probably also some unique challenges faced by each of those communities. And if we're going to be able to serve them, we need to spend time listening and learning and figuring out what's happening in those places. One of the ways we do that is going to be through our spotlights on economic inclusion. Through some of our outreach, what we heard from communities is that sometimes people just have their head down and they're so busy in the work and they're so focused on what they're doing is that they can't take a second to look up and to figure out, hey, what else is happening around me that might be helpful? Who can I learn from? And so this is going to be an effort on our part to kind of highlight best and or promising practices that are happening around our district. We will do that probably hopefully on a monthly basis, but it's going to be a real opportunity, like I said, to kind of shine a spotlight on good things that are happening that we think people should be learning from. We also spend a decent amount of time just doing listening sessions where we will invite people from various parts of our district together to tell us what's going on. I think one of the other things, and I feel like I'm doing it now, but a lot of times we talk about the Fed and what we're doing, but I think the listening sessions are nice for me because it's a way for us to just listen. We just kind of say, hey, throw out a few questions and say, tell us what's going on. What are the things we need to know about? And so those are really great opportunities for us to hear what's going on. And then finally, we just do some traditional community outreach activities. So a lot of that is whether we are meeting one-on-one with people, we are going to community meetings. I probably sit on 4 or 5 different groups, planning committees, councils, and it's just a way for us to plug in, make sure that we're aware of what's happening, and then think about how can we be responsive and supportive of those community needs.
So, hi guys, I'm Zan. I work with Treye at the Cleveland Fed, and we work together, I guess, pretty often because I'm over in outreach and education. So, well, I guess Treye does a lot of outreach with adults. I do a lot of outreach with students and universities and K-12 and educators. So, we overlap a little bit. But anyways, I have a Kahoot that I put together so for some questions for Treye. So I guess what I'll ask is if you guys could get your phones out. All right, so you've got 4 different questions to ask listed here. Did you consider other career paths outside of community outreach? What is something you've enjoyed working on in your current role? What does a typical day look like for you? And what is the most challenging part of your current role? All right, Treye, I'm sure, can you see my screen if you want to answer the first one? It's, did you consider other career paths outside of community outreach?
Not only did I consider them, I've tried many of them. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been, yes, I've considered a lot of career paths, and never did I ever think that I was going to be working at the Fed. The Fed is just I love working at the Fed, and I hope you feel the same way too, but it's such an odd place. But I think that the nice thing about my career path that I've kind of chosen or that I've gone down is that I've just had so many opportunities to work interesting places. And as I kind of stated in the presentation, like my North Star was always trying to figure out what are the things that what are the places where I could help people. And I think that the nice thing is that as long as I feel like there's some way I can accurately reflect that I'm helping people, then I could say, okay, like this is a place where I could see myself. So yes, thought of lots of career paths. There are some that I may still be pursuing someday, who knows? I'd love to be a writer. I want to write children's books. Maybe that's something I can do in my spare time that I don't have. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, thought of all kind of career paths. They all sound appealing.
Maybe a follow-up that kind of goes with what you were talking about. So from all of your other careers, what skills did you retain or that you utilize now from those? Because you talked about they've offered you a lot of different perspectives and skills that you bring to your current career. So maybe could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I think the thing that has been the most important skill that I think I've learned from all of my career path is really just seeing how, maybe this isn't a skill, but it's seeing how interconnected people are and how systems and just the way our society is interconnected, and everything. Nothing is the result of one specific factor. And so I think about this from an economics perspective. So, we're dealing with issues related to, disparities in the job market. And these are complex. That's a complex question that we know is not responsible. It's not the response, or excuse me, it's not the outcome of any one thing. So yes, we could choose to a certain intervention, but there are other factors that you have to consider as well. And so I think that being able to think about how education and housing and um, safety and all these issues work together, and how you have to think, and how I think it forces you to be collaborative in nature. And so I think that being able to take a step back and look at how all these pieces are connected and how multiple people have a role and impact in getting to where we are is probably the most important fact that or most important skill that I've developed through all of my various experiences. So is that a good answer? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I was going to say, how did being in sports administration prepare you for working with economists in your program on economic inclusion?
It's funny. So my program, my degree program was essentially like an MBA, but instead of talking about Apple, we were talking about Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And so in some ways, I think it was really helpful because it just prepared me to have critical thinking skills. But a lot of what we took were, like I said, a lot of the classes were, we took law classes, we took accounting and business classes and financing. And so, we took classes that I think some of my econ compatriots have taken similar classes, but the content and like what the businesses we were talking about were different. But I think at its core, it was pretty similar to some of the other classes that others have been taking. But at graduation, I did walk across the stage in shorts and tennis shoes, and that did give people a pretty big kick. So,
so how about the second most voted question on here? What is the most challenging part of your current role?
That is tough. So the most challenging part of my current role, honestly, is limiting myself in terms of what we pursue. We are incredibly fortunate that I think the bank as a whole and the leadership within PEI kind of give us a lot of runway to say, hey, if you see something that we need to be talking about, or if you hear an issue that you think there's something there that we should be working in this space, like feel free to pursue that a little bit. Feel free to like go down this path and see where it leads, and think about how we might be working in this space. So the hardest thing for me, honestly, is like trying to limit myself, because I have to recognize, like, hey, I'm one person. I can only work for so many hours a week. There's only so much that I have that I can give of myself personally. And I think that's a big challenge, because there are so many topics that are of interest, and there are so many stories that I hear about when I talk to people that I'm just like, wow, I need to dig more into this. And I get so excited by it. And I send my boss text messages all the time. It's like, hey, I got this crazy idea. And he's like, okay. He's like, do you have time to do this? I'm like, yes, I can make this work. And so I think the biggest thing is because I'm passionate about this role, and because I am in a space where I really care about the work we're doing, I want to help as many people as possible. But so finding that balance of saying, like, okay, some of these things may need to wait until next year, or some of these things may need to be carried by somebody else. Like, that's probably the hardest part of my role.
So you made me think of another question. So when you're hearing all of these ideas in your outreach and listening events, how do you bring them back to the researchers and economists on your team to tell them, hey, I think this is something we should focus on as a research area?
It's usually very clunky the way I do it. I'm usually like, hey guys, I found out this really cool story. Let me tell you about it. And part of it is just saying, mean, sometimes I have an idea. So, for example, um, one of the things that I'm actually really thinking about now, and I don't know if this is going to turn into anything, but hopefully I don't jinx myself. But I'm thinking about the fact that in I think probably 10 or 11 cities across our district, they have mayors who are people of color. So Black or Hispanic or Asian mayors who happen to be recently elected or have been reelected. And one of the things I'm thinking about now is like, what does that mean for cities in terms of economic inclusion? It was kind of inspired by an economist who will be joining our team this summer, who's doing some research on this. But I was like, okay, I wonder if there's some informal work that I can be doing, like in cities that have mayors who are people of color, are they more forward thinking about laws or about policies that are going to have an impact on communities there? And so, I had a conversation with our team the other day. I was like, hey, I just thought of this, and I just looked this up, and we have 10 mayors here in these cities, and I have access to five or six of them. I think I'm going to reach out and start asking people what we're going to do. And sometimes it's as easy as that. Sometimes it's like I come in with an idea. Like, I was really interested in some of the stuff when the census came out, and I was like, hey guys, are we doing anything around the census? And the team just kind of looked at me, and I'm like, we need to be doing something. And sometimes it's just as simple as that, as me just saying, hey, I don't know what we do in this space, but like, I need really smart people to help me figure this out. And so, I think we have a great team set up where sometimes I can bring ideas and sometimes I can bring half-baked ideas. But yeah, there's no set way that I bring ideas up to our team. I think it's just kind of whatever I think makes the most sense at the time.
What professional opportunities outside of work do you participate in? What advice would you give to someone interested in the work you do? What's one thing about your job that people are surprised to learn? And how does economics impact you, particularly a non-economist? So select which one you guys are interested in. Okay, so I think the big one is, what advice would you give to someone interested in the work you do?
So the best piece of advice that I think I can give people is figure out your why or your North Star, or however you define it, and then like let that guide your work. Some of the most, so I am, as even though I'm a non-economist, I'm really trying hard to ground myself and to get better in economics. And I think the hiring process that we just went through was really illuminating for me to see what PhD candidates are working on. And the ones I was most impressed by were people who were drawing on their own personal experiences. So if you are an African-American male, or if you're a Hispanic female, or if someone in your family has a person with a disability, or if you are a veteran, or if you come from a family where they're immigrant family, or whatever it is, it's taking your lived experiences and figuring out how to apply that to a topic that you think needs more work. Those were the presentations and the people that I was most inspired by, was people who just said, okay, I have a personal connection to this work and I'm passionate about this work, and there's a gap in our understanding and we need to learn more. So I guess the advice I would give is to find what you're passionate about, and let that be the driver of what you're doing. And don't be afraid if nobody else is studying a topic that you think there needs to be people studying. Like I said, they're the most unique job market papers that we read were the ones that I found the most fascinating, because there were 100 who all fit the same basic thing, and I probably could understand half the vocabulary, but like when people are like, hey, I'm really interested in how policing policies impact educational attainments in schools around them. And I was like, oh, wow, that sounds interesting. And then like you get into it and you see how there's real life applications. So my encouragement, like I said, would be find what's passionate, let that guide the work you do. Don't be afraid.
And I was going to say, that's kind of a good point to make, because the Fed actually has a program that we launched for undergrad students where they're able to showcase their innovative and creative research. So I'll put a link in the chat if anybody is interested in that. So let's see, Trey. The next one I have here is, how does economics impact you, particularly a non-economist?
Oh man. So besides, besides like confusing me and like man, like I feel like one, it gives me an appreciation for like the incredibly smart people that I work with. But I think the big way that it impacts me is through my ability to help communities, and I think that economics provides such a powerful way to explain and validate the experiences that people are having on the ground. And I know that sometimes it gets easy for people to lose sight of the fact that like data points are people, you know what I mean? So I think there's a danger of understanding like, hey, like I have all this great research and the research says this, and like that's reflecting of somebody's experience. But I think that there's power in knowing that like that you can explain what people are feeling and what people are experiencing in their real life. So I think that's one of the big things. And I think it's also important too to think about how the way that we frame research questions and the way that we go about trying to solve our research questions, has real impact about policies, and it has real impact about funding and the way what gets funded in communities and what doesn't, and what policies happen to kind of address inequality or not. And so I think that it's really important. Economics is hugely important in the way, like I said, in helping reflect what's happening, but also to make change in the community. And so I think that for me, it's just an incredibly important tool. And I'm working to help communities understand how they use it. And so I think it's, for me, it's a great tool that we need to unlock how non-economists like myself can figure out how to do something with the research. So.
Oh, you have a question in the chat. So
Okay.
Christina, I think, asked, is your outreach being adopted by other feds?
And I'm going to add to that really quick. One of the questions I had was, how can academics, especially students, we have a lot of students who are part of this guest list, can get involved in this space, the community outreach space with the Cleveland Fed. So Christina's question is this being adopted by other feds? And then my follow-up question to that is, how do students get involved with your program?
Okay, so is this being adopted by other feds? Yes. So there are a growing number of feds who are thinking about this type of research. There are established centers. So there is one in Minneapolis, there's one in St. Louis. Chicago Fed has recently launched one. Similar to the program on economic inclusion, they have names that usually sound similar. So I think that, the Institute for Economic Equity is the one in St. Louis, and in Minneapolis is the Opportunity and Growth Institute. And then I know that there are also smaller projects that are out of like the Atlanta Fed, Philly Fed. So more and more Federal Reserve banks are thinking this way and are setting up teams or institutes that are going to be working on these issues. How do you get involved? It's a great question. So, I mean, I think there's probably a number of ways to get involved. I mean, we're trying to figure out, one, how do we make sure that our work is interactive and that people can engage with us, just on a regular basis. So, I mean, like the easiest way is if you're interested, just reach out to us. I mean, and so I think, I think my information may be shared here somewhere. I'm sure that we can make sure people get it. But if you have questions, like I probably get a half a dozen emails a week where people are just like, hey, this is interesting, what are you guys doing? And I talk to a lot of people just who are interested and reach out that way. We do have an internship program. We have research assistants who work with us. So there's like a very formal process that you can go through. Zan could probably also talk about some of the other ways that you can get involved with the Fed in general, but I would say the most direct way, honestly, is to just reach out. Most people in this space that I've found are really willing to talk to anyone who's interested in the work we do. So.
Now that's great. That's great feedback. And one thing I really like that you guys have so many different branches part of this economic inclusion, especially the part of the commentary where, yes, there's a lot of research that goes behind, but to kind of translate that to the general public, to be able to tell the data story to the general public, and I think it's such an important part of the for the research, and that's something we push over students when they take part in the Econ games and independent studies on research and so on. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Zan, do you have anything to add to that in terms of how students could get involved, especially if they want to go to the community outreach area, but and of course some parts of your RA positions as well?
Yeah, so the internship and RA positions that actually are available at any of the reserve banks across the US, as well as the Board of Governors. We typically open up applications in October is when they're due. So in the fall. So if you're interested in being in one of those roles, and it seems really early because you'll apply for it in the fall, but the internship will be for the summer. And they're pretty popular. However, good news, if you know someone at the Fed, like Trey or myself, and you email us to let us know that you've applied and maybe if you've participated in some of our other Fed events, usually, we'll send your name over to research and say, hey, yes, networking does matter. We've met them and we think you should take a look at their application. And I'm sure Dr. Patel could tell you he's had several students who now have interned in RA, correct, at the Cleveland Fed. And then for the Economic Scholars Program, which actually Dr. Patel and Albarani are both part of, we're putting on for the first time this huge event for undergraduate students. It's a research conference that's put on for undergrads by undergrads. So they're actually doing all the peer reviewing. You guys would serve as session chairs and discussants. We're doing posters and papers, and it'll be hybrid to make sure if you're not able to make it to the Cleveland Fed in person, you can actually participate virtually. And even if you don't want to serve in a role, you're more than welcome to attend. We'll be inviting professors from all different universities, also Fed employees. Our entire research and economics function at the Cleveland Fed will be there. So that's another good opportunity for networking, or if you're a senior and maybe going into the workforce, I would suggest you come. There will be a lot of individuals, and I'm sure we'll also have some other businesses and industries represented as well. The other thing that the Cleveland Fed does that specifically I would say for university students is the Women in Economics program, which actually Treye and the program on economic inclusion are part of, as well as community development. So, and it's not just for women, it's for everyone, but it focuses on topics around diversity in economics. So we've done a lot of different things about, you might be thinking about going on to your PhD. What does that path look like? We did a panel on that. We did another panel on economists of color and talking about their career journey and the challenges that they might have faced to get where they are today. Let's see, Trey, which there's a lot of different sessions. We had Dr. Cook. Lisa Cook was our keynote, in 2019 at the Cleveland Fed. And I think Dr. Patel just posted, it rotates between banks. So the St. Louis Fed is doing one right now, and then the Cleveland Fed's turn is up this fall. So ours will probably be in September, October of this year. Let's see. And then in terms of other outreach, if you're part of an econ club or your macro or micro econ courses and you ever want anybody to come speak, whether it's doing like the type of research that Trey is talking about, or maybe it's about different opportunities and careers at the Fed, you can always reach out to us. We have people come and speak to classes all the time, especially economists or some of our RAs. They're always happy to do that. I don't know, Trey, what else am I forgetting that we have outreach?
I mean, I feel like that's it. I mean, or that's not it, but I mean, I feel like that's a good list. I don't think you're missing anything, any major things there. I think we got most of them covered.
Thank you. That was great. Any questions from our guests that we haven't yet tackled and want our guests to tackle? So please, let's wait a minute or so and see if there are any questions that show up. So Trey, well, if any questions do show up or not, how about you answer one of the questions that was interesting was, what is your day-to-day life working as part of the economic inclusion program at the Fed?
So my day-to-day, I literally do have one of the, well, I shouldn't say no 2 days are exactly the same, but I mean, I do a lot, I spend a lot of time talking to people, which again, as an introvert, it kind of wears me down a little bit, but I love talking to people and I love learning. And so, on a day-to-day basis, I'm usually spending time interacting with staff around the bank. So part of my job is trying to figure out how do we connect in with other parts of the bank. So our program is situated under research. We are outside of community development, but there's a lot of overlap with what we do. So I'm connecting with community development. I'm connecting with our department, our Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunity. I'm connecting, sometimes with Zan and her team. I'm also trying to figure out, what's happening in other reserve banks across the system. I am connecting with the Board of Governors. And so a lot of it is just a lot of communicating with people and figuring out what's happening, what are the needs that there are that are in the community, and how can we be a resource. And so some of that is just making sure that I'm aware of everything that's going on. A lot of the conversations I have may not turn into anything for several months, and that's okay. So sometimes it's just being aware so that when a conversation happens a month from now, I can say, hey, you know what? I know exactly who to connect you to. And then, whether it's a community group or a different bank or whatever it is, whether it's philanthropy, just being able to play that matchmaking role. So that's a lot of what I do. I try to read occasionally. And so part of what I do is just reading about what's happening in communities. And so it's making sure that I'm aware of if there are policies that are happening, if there are interesting programs, I'm also just kind of trying to keep my ear to the ground there. So it's a little bit of, it's a wide variety of everything, but it's never dull. It's never a dull moment at work, but it's exciting. So.
Thanks for sharing that. It's definitely very fascinating, especially all the different roles you have to play and engage with a wide variety of groups around the Cleveland Fed, and then the community itself as well. Just so much to learn as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's definitely a very fascinating job. Well, I'm going to give you one last question. This should be easy, maybe putting you on the spot. So if you had to recommend one book for the audience to read, your favorite book, what would it be?
Oh man, my favorite book. Oh man, I have bad taste in books. So I would say, I feel like when I usually read, it's usually light reading. It's like something to kind of take my mind off of all the heavy stuff, heavy work that we're doing. So my favorite books, honestly, are right now are all either children's books or like cartoon books. So if Calvin and Hobbes, favorite book, anything with any Calvin and Hobbes comic book.
Fantastic.
Amazing stories. So if you don't know who Calvin and Hobbes are, check them out. They're great. A lot of creativity.
Well, that's great. And as we just talked about when we started your talk about the work-life balance, right? So sometimes we need a break, right? And that's a perfect way to read something, enjoy it, at the same time, not overwork your brain. So that's great. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, the Cleveland Fed. Thank you, Trey. This was fantastic. It was insightful. Thank you, Zan, for sharing all the resources the Cleveland Fed has in the tank, and all the support they show us at the Econ Games. Audience, let's give them a virtual applause. So thank you so much. We will have our next speaker session on April 6th, and we're excited to have Fanta Treye from the SETI Collective. So until then, we will see you then. Thank you, guys.